This rumored leak for the Spider-Man Brand New Day post-credit scene featuring Steve Rogers and Thor has me scratching my head about who does and doesn't remember Peter Parker. Hey everybody, Colton here, and there is a new report that a lot of you guys have sent me, or leak, whatever you want to call it, about the post-credit scene of Spider-Man Brand New Day, and it being a scene that is pulled directly from Avengers Doomsday, just like the Doom scene in the First Steps post-credit scene, and the Avengers Tower scene with the Fantastic Four rocket that we saw in the Thunderbolts post-credit scene. Those were both scenes that were taken directly from Avengers Doomsday. Now, the claim is that the post-credit scene for Spider-Man Brand New Day will feature Steve Rogers back in the present-day MCU alongside Thor and the Fantastic Four, as well as the New Avengers and the New Avengers
with the Z.
He is doing a head count of who all they have on the roster, and he asks, where's Peter? Where's Spider-Man? And apparently he is met with confused looks from everybody.
I'm so confused.
Now, all of these heroes should know who Spider-Man is, like know of the hero Spider-Man, maybe even remember that they've worked with him in the past, but maybe as far as they know, they don't know his secret identity because of the spell, which we'll talk about, and maybe they don't know how to contact him, and they might think that Spider-Man is just a bit of a lone wolf. Anyway, this report is that Steve Rogers, he remembers Peter Parker because he wasn't on Earth 616 at the time of the Forget Peter Parker spell when it was cast in No Way Home by Doctor Strange. Now, remember, the way that the spell supposedly works was that, for some reason, a reason I call because the script said so don't question it reasoning, the cracking of the sky and everyone, primarily villains from other universes who knew Peter Parker was Spider-Man, they were like spilling into the MCU.
Don't you realize that in the multiverse there are an infinite number of people who know Peter Parker is Spider-Man? And if that spell gets loose, they're all coming here.
So Doctor Strange, upon the request of Peter, and like it was Peter's idea, he cast a spell that makes everyone forget Peter Parker, period. Not that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, but just forget Peter Parker, closes the purple sky cracks, ta-da, movie over. So anyway, how does this all tie into Steve Rogers and Avengers Doomsday? I won't sit here and bitch and moan anymore about how convoluted Spider-Man No Way Home is and its in-universe logic and the spell and all that. You've heard me do that before. The theory is that only people on Earth 616 were affected by the spell. So, since Steve Rogers wasn't on Earth 616 at the time of No Way Home, then that means, oh, well then he would still remember Peter Parker and remember that Peter Parker is Spider-Man. Well, I don't think that can be true because all of these villains from other Earths, other universes, they were coming into the MCU. So they of other universes, they had to have Strange's spell work on them so that they forget Peter Parker and therefore can no longer know Peter Parker is Spider-Man because they don't know who Peter Parker is.
I'm so confused.
So what we are told is that Doctor Strange's botched spell not only affected those in Universe 616, making them forget that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, what it ended up doing was reaching beyond the barriers of their universe and made it to where people in other universes who knew Peter Parker was Spider-Man somehow then get pulled into Universe 616. So in order for this spell to send those other characters back and the ones who are bleeding through the purple sky cracks coming into the MCU because they know Peter Parker is Spider-Man, and Strange and Peter decide, okay, we have to do this forget Peter Parker spell so they'll all go home and the sky will stop cracking open and allowing these other people in. That means that the spell could not only be 616 Earth or 616 universe bound. It had to affect those other realities as well, because those people from those realities were the ones bleeding in. So they had to forget so that the collision would stop happening. And so theoretically, that would have made it to where everyone who knew who Toby and Andrew's Peter Parkers were as well, they forgot who Peter Parker is. And that's going to be a huge change for their life when they get back home, especially like if Peter is with MJ and they have a family. You think that's something that Tom's Peter might have run by Andrew and Toby's Peter before doing that. But really the problem is, it's not that, oh, Doctor Strange and Tom's Peter didn't think to, run that by the other Spider-Man. No, the problem is that when they wrote this in the script, they didn't even consider it. I know I already said that I wouldn't take a bunch of time complaining about No Way Home or the spell because that's not what the video is. But anyway, Steve Rogers. Would Steve Rogers remember? And second to that, would Thor remember? Because he wasn't on Earth, Earth 616, when the spell was cast. He was in Universe 616, but not on the Earth. So here's how I see it. The spell, from what they told us in No Way Home, the spell seems to transcend the MCU, the Universe 616. It affects other universes. So the only way that Steve Rogers, who, we have been led to believe is, from various, leaks and reports, and there's your spoiler warning if you don't want to know anything about Doomsday, is living in the Fantastic Four universe, Universe 828. The only way that he would not be affected by this spell and would still remember Peter Parker is if the spell that was cast at the end of No Way Home only affected Universe 616 and the universes that the characters who knew Peter Parker was Spider-Man were coming in from, the people in the sky.
Are there people in the sky?
So, Universe 828, the Fantastic Four universe where Steve is supposedly living, it may not have been included because maybe it doesn't have a Peter Parker Spider-Man. But then, that's where the trouble lies, because even if Universe 828 doesn't have a Peter Parker, doesn't have a Spider-Man, if Steve Rogers is in that universe, and the spell at the opening of No Way Home was a spell that got botched and started pulling in people from all throughout the multiverse who knew Peter Parker was Spider-Man and started pulling them into the MCU, then shouldn't a Steve Rogers who was living over in Universe 828 have also been pulled back into the MCU, the 616, as a guy in another universe who knew Peter Parker was Spider-Man, just like all these other villains and whatnot?
These are confusing times.
So yeah, it's super convoluted because sure, you could say Steve wasn't affected by the spell because he was in another universe, and now here he is back in the 616, and oh wow, I still remember who Peter Parker is because I wasn't here when that spell was cast. But and that'll probably go over fine with the general audience and people who don't analyze this stuff like we do. But if you think about it for more than a second, it immediately falls apart when you remember that the spell at the end of No Way Home that made everybody forget Peter Parker, in order for it to do what it was cast to do, which was to stop people from other universes who knew Peter Parker was Spider-Man from coming into the MCU, so the spell had to wipe Peter Parker from their minds. That was how it worked. So it had to have affected other universes. And if you say, oh, well, Universe 828, the Fantastic Four universe where Steve is supposedly living, it wasn't affected. It wasn't part of the universes coming in. Well, why the hell not? Steve Rogers knows Peter Parker is Spider-Man. We're told every motherfucker throughout the multiverse who knows Peter Parker is Spider-Man is getting pulled into the MCU. So wouldn't Steve Rogers be a part of that? Makes my head hurt, man. Makes me angry. So look, long answer short. I don't know if Steve Rogers or Thor or Captain Marvel, people who were off planet or off universe, I don't know if they remember Peter Parker. The implications of that spell were that everyone, everywhere, forgets Peter Parker. And that's got some pretty massive implications when you actually stop and think about it. Not just for Tom Spider-Man or Peter Parker, but for every Spider-Man or Peter Parker in the entire multiverse. Toby should have got home and nobody know who the hell he is because they all had to forget Peter Parker. So will that ever be addressed? Will it be addressed in Brand New Day? Will it be addressed in Doomsday or Secret Wars or ever? No, probably not, because the whole fucking thing was just stupid to begin with. The spell at the beginning of No Way Home and its ramifications never made any sense. The spell at the end of No Way Home and its ramifications never made any sense. And that's because it was all just a cobbled together, devoid of logic, gimmick, plot device thing to bring Toby and Andrew and their baddies into the universe and to undo them revealing Spider-Man's secret identity at the end of Far From Home. That's all it ever was. And, I say this as somebody who really enjoyed No Way Home, but my God, is it a messy film. But yeah, let me know. Do you think that Steve Rogers will still remember that Peter Parker is Spider-Man? I think it would be cool to have Steve Rogers show back up in the MCU And he's one of the few people that still knows who Peter Parker is, rather. I said Peter Parker is Spider-Man, but knows who Peter Parker is, period, and remembers their experiences together and stuff. That would be really special to see that moment between those two characters. But it really wouldn't make any sense for him not to be affected if every person throughout the multiverse who knows Peter Parker is Spider-Man, who is getting pulled into the MCU, was supposed to have forgotten who is Peter Parker. It's supposed to affect everybody. And then, as we just talked about, that has a whole list of other ramifications that I'm afraid will just never be addressed. But hey. If you're new here, please do feel free to subscribe, hit the bell so you get notified every time we upload a new video. I promise our videos aren't normally me bitching and moaning so much, but this one really just got me going. All right, I will see you guys soon. Bye!